people were baffled by the continual return of Percy to the shelter. This was his 9th time back, leaving the staff at their wits' end. But when Stacy, a fresh volunteer, agreed to take Percy in, they finally uncovered the issue that haunted him. Welcome to Wonderbot Animals. Stacy was going through a really rough day. She found herself headed back to the animal shelter, bearing the root of her distress, an innocent-looking cat nestled cosily in the back seat. This was her 9th trip back to the shelter just to return the same kitten. A month back, Stacy had been thrilled to bring Percy home, not anticipating the subsequent trials she would endure. She had vowed to herself and the shelter staff that she wouldn't be the next in line to bring Percy back, yet here she was. Stacy, known for her compassion among the volunteers and staff, felt devastatingly guilty in the face of returning Percy. An ardent animal enthusiast herself, Stacy believed in giving second chances, but she felt her resolve wavering. As soon as she exited the vehicle, Stacy carried Percy out, taking along a tiny bed she bought for him. Sensing the change of environment, the cat stirred from his slumber. His mellow purring made Stacy's heart wrench. She wondered, how could an adorable creature like him pose such a conundrum? Upon reaching the shelter's reception, Stacy was greeted by 3 employees. Anticipating their query about Percy's return, she prepared herself to recount the harrowing struggle tale. The ambiguity of earlier adopters' reasoning to return him had always puzzled the staff. However, as one herself, Stacy knew she had to provide a concrete reason. As she started narrating her ordeal, an overwhelming sense of melancholy began settling in. Recalling the recent events in stark contrast to Percy's content state now, she doubted if anybody was equipped to deal with his eccentric disposition. Stacy's initial encounter with Percy was rather uneventful. Having served at the animal shelter for a few months, she found it rather peaceful and was in harmony with the staff and animals alike. However, that was until Percy showed up. The cat was brought back to the shelter for the 8th time by her latest guardian. Only a month ago, this woman had departed from the shelter. An immense joy radiated from her as she took Percy, expected to be her permanent pet, with her. The woman instantly fell for the little cat the moment their eyes met and desired to make him part of her household. However, a month later, she came back as an entirely different person. She blamed the shelter, accusing them of concealing facts about Percy's character and conduct because they were desperate to find him a new home. According to her, the last month had been challenging with the cat, and she was dissatisfied about the shelter placing such a troublemaker kitten in her custody. Stacy, working at the shelter, attempted to soothe the agitated woman, urging her to share the full story, but the woman had no desire to elaborate. She expressed her grievance once more before leaving the shelter, leaving behind a baffled Stacy, the shelter workers, and Percy. Stacy was there when the woman took Percy along and was confident the woman was genuinely smitten with the kitten a month ago. She couldn't bring herself to accept the woman's accusations now. She didn't believe there was anything Percy could have done that was terribly wrong. Yet, according to the records, all of Percy's previous owners had reported the same ordeal. They said the cat appeared to be as pure as an angel, but acted like a creature possessed. As Stacy guided Percy back to his cage, the weary cat immediately settled down for a nap, as if the day's proceedings had him tired as well. She studied him, pondering on what really occurred at his previous dwelling. She was annoyed that Percy, despite being so young, had already moved through various homes and was back to the beginning. These kinds of experiences often emotionally scar animals as they end up feeling discarded. Since he was brought back to the shelter again, getting Percy another home seemed near impossible, and he might have to stay at the shelter indefinitely. The shelter was already bustling with new animals arriving nearly every day, and homes for them were limited. Hence, Percy, instead of continuing living in the shelter, might have to be put down to make space for other arrivals. Stacy might not have a clear picture about Percy's past, but she strongly believed in second chances. She was determined to be the one to extend that chance to Percy. The following day, Stacy asked to take Percy home to discover the cause of his unusual behavior. As an employee, it was within her rights to make such a request. Yet, there was one issue. Stacy was still living with her parents, who were not particularly fond of animals. She pondered how to present her case so that they would agree, and in the end, chose to explain the situation honestly. Much to her surprise, her parents were open to the idea. With the majority of their children having moved out, and only Stacy remaining, the house had started to feel quite large for just the two of them. They had contemplated adopting a dog eventually, however, they were not opposed to the idea of getting a cat instead. 2 days afterwards, Stacy brought Percy to her home for the first time. Eager to accommodate their new guest, her parents had already filled the house with pet toys, beddings, and a cat tree to help him get accustomed to his new environment. They had even installed a small pet door to allow Percy easy access in and out of the house whenever he desired. The couple was delighted to include Percy in their household and willingly adjusted their daily routine to make his transition smooth. Yet, Percy appeared to remain unenthusiastic for the rest of the day. He would recoiled or retreated entirely whenever Stacy's parents tried to interact with him. On the rare occasions they managed to incorporate Percy, he would wriggle in their grasp, biting and scratching until they were forced to release him. Percy seemed disinterested in everything, a difficult situation indeed. Stacy and her parents came to the conclusion that Percy was simply shy and needed some time to feel at home. They had hoped that by the next day, Percy would start opening up to them. Unfortunately, their hopes did not materialize. As the sun rose the next day, Percy maintained his indifferent demeanor. The task of caring for Percy was not without its setbacks. Stacy was frequently left with injuries and bite marks from her efforts to connect with Percy. After countless hours, her parents conceded defeat, referring to Percy as trouble and distancing themselves from him. However, Stacy wasn't prepared to give in. This was her responsibility, and she wanted to see it through. As days blended into weeks, Percy's standoffish behavior persisted. The shelter staff was concerned whenever Stacy showed up with bruises and bites all over her arms, but Stacy merely smiled in response, assuring them that she was fine. However, the strain was starting to show. Not only was Percy's lack of affection perplexing, but Stacy was also facing challenges getting him to use his litter box. At times he behaved, but there were moments when he would make a mess throughout their home, seemingly undeterred by her chastisements. She had even switched his litter box thinking it was the issue, yet the problem persisted. He would tirelessly scratch the furniture and upholstery, knocking over cups and glasses off the countertops or tables, not caring if they broke. Her parents, who initially were understanding, began suggesting she return the cat to the shelter. Yet, she pleaded for another chance. She sought the advice of friends who owned cats and her peers from the shelter. Some offered assistance, while others gave hints and strategies to manage him. However, no solution seemed to work for long. If circumstances did not change, Stacy had no choice but to rehome Percy. As night fell, Stacy felt consumed with worry. Emerging from her room to check on Percy, she found him sleeping soundly. She spent the rest of the night upstairs, but was jolted awake in the morning by persistent knocking. It was her mother. She'd walked downstairs to begin her day, and to her surprise, Percy was missing. She had quietly searched around their home, hoping to locate him without waking Stacy, but it was to no avail. Her mother approached Stacy's room, hoping she might know where Percy had disappeared to. Stacy was just as bewildered, pondering on his whereabouts as she joined her mother in checking around the neighborhood. Stacy visited each neighbor with Percy's photo, inquiring if anyone had seen him, yet her searches didn't yield any promising results. Certain individuals believed they had noticed him earlier in the day, but assumed he was a wanderer and didn't pay much mind. Exhausted after a day's fruitless search, Stacy came back home irate. She had taken the day off to find Percy and knew she'd be probed about his well-being when she returned. However, she couldn't bear to reveal the truth. It would portray her as careless and substantiate the fact that she too was incapable of looking after him. The following day at the shelter, Stacy strived to steer clear of any Percy-related conversations, a move that raised everyone's eyebrows. She merely stated that Percy was acclimatizing to his new surroundings and staunchly rebuffed any further discussions. The staff was intrigued but chose to respect Stacy's decision, considering she seemed to be the sole person with insight on how to care for the problematic Percy. She would call home during her breaks, inquiring if there was any news of Percy, but the response was always the same. On her way back, she diligently checked all alleyways and popular places where stray cats usually resided, but there was no sign of Percy. If Percy was not found shortly, she would have to update the shelter about the unfolding situation. During the weekend, she decided to stay indoors, contemplating her next step. As a week flew by, Percy was nowhere to be seen. It seemed as if the feline had vanished into thin air. The shelter was inquiring about an update, and she couldn't delay it any further. In an attempt to comprehend Percy better, she devoted the entire week to revisit the feedback from all previous owners who had returned Percy. The feedback was identical in essence. Percy was standoffish and hostile, often neglected using the litter tray, and showed no interest in his toys. One of the previous owners noticed Percy attempting to slip past a small window to escape the confines of his home. He recalled being scratched brutally while trying to prevent his escape. Another past owner had to seclude himself in the kitchen during meals due to Percy's habit of knocking glasses off the table. These narratives fit perfectly with the actions of Percy at Stacy's home. Slowly, she saw a pattern emerging, but to confirm her suspicions, she would need to make a phone call. While engaging with the person at the other end of the call, Stacy was taken aback when the reason behind Percy's unusual actions was finally unveiled. Everything puzzled her regarding Percy's behaviour now started making sense. If she knew Percy's whereabouts now, maybe she could get him the essential attention he needed. Suddenly, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID displayed the shelter's name. This was the first incoming call she received since joining there, forcing Stacy to presume an urgent matter was at play. She immediately answered the call, listening to the familiar voice of her superior on the other end. "Where's Percy?" was his pressing question. Stacy could discern his worries and agitation. Mulling over for a proper response, she realized that him asking meant he was already aware of the answer. So, she told him the unvarnished reality. Percy was not with her and hadn't been for some time. Upon acknowledging her truthfulness, his voice's tone softened, and he disclosed some good news. Percy was located. A local man found Percy rummaging through some street trash a few days back. The man sheltered the cat and fed him. Later, he noticed the shelter's number on Percy's collar and dialed to inform. The man was eager to hand Percy back to his original owners since his dog and the cat hadn't been getting along since its arrival. He was fed up with the disorder within his household. Stacy's superior ordered her to make a trip to the man's house to retrieve Percy. He was curious about what had transpired and was unsure why she hadn't inquired for additional aid or simply reverted the cat to them. He provided Stacy with the man's location, and she quickly got there to claim Percy. Percy's face still maintained its indifferent expression, and as soon as Stacy placed him in the back seat, he fell asleep. Returning to the shelter, surrounded by her caring co-workers, Stacy experienced the stress of the past weeks. She hadn't realized how tense she had become until that moment. She unveiled everything that had transpired since she had taken Percy home and all the commotion he had caused. As he currently was, he was not an easy being to handle. However, it also highlighted that his old owners returned him for a legitimate reason. Nonetheless, it was now the time to reveal the true cause behind his peculiar behavior to everyone. A few hours earlier, Stacy had phoned his initial owner and at last understood the situation. Percy was born as one of 4 siblings who had spent the initial phase of their lives as a family alongside their mother. At the outset, the owner was content to keep all of them. However, his financial circumstances quickly altered and he was unable to cater to the needs of 5 cats. Consequently, he had to give them to reliable acquaintances, retaining just one cat. Being parted from his siblings triggered anxiety within Percy, making him hastily abandon his original home. Since he wasn't wearing any identification, he ended up lost and was ultimately discovered by Animal Rescue, who brought him to the shelter. This event marked the beginning of his journey with potential families. Not only did he feel the loss of his family, but being moved home to home seemingly reminded him of the stability and tight-knit bond he had lost, leading him to resist all fresh ties. Being encircled by unfamiliar faces every month contributed to his disorientation. Reacting out of fear, he would claw and bite. His inclination towards causing trouble was another way of expressing his discomfort. He tended to form unstable bonds before ultimately being sent back, and his last act of escaping was to avoid getting returned once more. Giving Percy to another person, given his condition, wasn't plausible. However, Stacy was hopeful that with adequate resources and help, things would improve. Percy was relatively inexperienced, and the shelter could be his avenue of learning positive behaviours and coping with his fears. Thanks to financial aid from various individuals, Stacy managed to invest her time and useful equipment in Percy's relearning journey. Shedding ingrained habits is challenging, but after a month, noticeable changes in Percy were evident. He was gradually becoming more receptive to touch, and his litter habits were also improving. For the concluding phase of his training, Stacy brought Percy back to her home. It was almost like he had transformed into a different feline. Initially, her parents were reluctant to engage with him, recalling the injuries they had suffered earlier. However, they soon changed their minds, noticing his changed behavior. After multiple attempts and 8 different households, Percy had at last discovered an individual willing to connect with him and offer him a secure and healthy environment needed for his overall well-being. Eventually, Stacy legally adopted him and built a strong bond of friendship. She was correct with her belief that Percy deserved a second chance, and she found her joy in being the one to provide him with that. What a heartwarming encounter! Would you consider adopting a challenging pet? Do you think it would have been better if the previous carer had employed qualified trainers instead of abandoning Percy? Share your views in the comments section and catch you in the upcoming video.